The dust devil swept across Elena Martinez's boots as she watched the last of her cattle stagger toward the empty water trough, and she knew that by sunset tomorrow, her entire herd would be dead. The summer of 1878 in western Texas had brought the worst drought anyone could remember, turning the land into a cracked and desperate wasteland where ranchers fought over every drop of water like it was liquid gold. Elena stood in the middle of her family's ranch, the Martinez spread that her father had built with his own hands before fever took him 2 winters past, and felt the weight of failure pressing down on her 22-year-old shoulders. The cattle were skeletal, their ribs showing through hide that had lost its healthy sheen, and their bellows of thirst echoed across the barren landscape like a funeral dirge. She had tried everything. The creek that ran through the property had dried up 6 weeks ago, leaving nothing but a snake of cracked earth where water once flowed. The well near the house had gone dry 3 days later, forcing Elena to haul water from town until that source began to fail too. Now the town well was rationed, and the sheriff stood guard to make sure nobody took more than their share, which was barely enough to keep a person alive, let alone a herd of 30 cattle. Elena wiped the sweat from her forehead with a bandana that had once been red, but was now the color of the dust that covered everything. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her back, and her calico dress was patched in 3 places. She had already sold her mother's silver to buy feed. But feed without water was useless. The cattle could not eat what their bodies could not process, and they were shutting down one system at a time. "Miss Martinez," came a voice from behind her, and she turned to see Thomas Wade riding up on a sturdy buckskin horse that looked better fed than any animal she had seen in weeks. Thomas Wade was something of a mystery in these parts. He had arrived 2 years ago and bought the old Henderson place to the north, paying cash money that made folks wonder about his past. He kept to himself mostly, a tall man of 26 with sun-darkened skin and pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He wore his brown hat low and his gun belt well oiled, and there were rumors he had been a lawman somewhere up in Colorado before he came south. "Mr. Wade," Elena said, her voice hoarse from the dry air and from holding back tears she refused to shed in front of anyone. He sat easy in his saddle, looking at her cattle with an expression she could not quite read. "Heard in town you were having trouble." "Everyone is having trouble," she replied, lifting her chin. "The drought does not play favorites." "No," he agreed, "but some folks have deeper wells than others." He paused, and his horse shifted beneath him. "My well is still producing." Elena felt her heart skip a beat, but she forced herself to stay calm. Water was worth more than gold right now, and men had been shot for less. "That is fortunate for you." "I have more than I need," Thomas said slowly, as if he was thinking through each word, "and your cattle are suffering." "I can manage my own affairs," Elena said, even though they both knew it was a lie. Thomas looked at her for a long moment, and she felt something pass between them, some current of understanding that had nothing to do with words. "I am not offering charity, Miss Martinez. I am offering water for your herd. You can bring them to my place, use my well, and my grazing land. What is left of it anyway." "Why would you do that?" Elena asked, suspicion rising in her chest. Nothing came free in this world, especially not from a man to a woman alone. "Because watching good animals die when there is a way to save them does not sit right with me," Thomas said simply, "and because your father once helped me fix a broken axle when I first came to town and did not know a soul. He did not ask for payment. He just helped." Elena remembered that day. Her father had come home late for supper, saying he had stopped to help a stranger on the road. That was who her father had been, a man who believed in doing right because it was right, not because there was something in it for him. "I cannot pay you," Elena said quietly. "I have already sold everything of value." "Did I ask for payment?" Thomas said. "Bring your cattle over tomorrow at first light. I will have the trough filled and waiting." Before she could respond, he had turned his horse and was riding back north toward his property, leaving Elena standing in the dust with hope blooming in her chest for the first time in weeks. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed in the small ranch house and listened to the cattle lowing in the darkness. And she thought about Thomas Wade and why a man would offer such help. There had to be an angle, some way he planned to benefit, because that was how the world worked. Yet her father had spoken well of him in the brief time they had known each other, and her father had been an excellent judge of character. When the first light of dawn broke over the eastern horizon, Elena was already up and dressed. She saddled her mare, a tough little paint named Cielo, who was lean but still strong, and began the work of moving her cattle north. It was slow going, the animals were weak and reluctant to move, and more than once she had to dismount and physically push a steer to get it walking again. The sun was high by the time she reached the boundary of Thomas Wade's property, and she found him waiting for her at the fence line. He had already opened the gate wide, and beyond him she could see a large water trough that was full to the brim, the water catching the sunlight like diamonds. The cattle smelled it immediately. Their heads came up, and they began to move faster, pushing past Elena in their desperation to reach the water. She let them go, watching as they crowded around the trough and began to drink in great, gulping swallows. "Easy now," Thomas said, moving among them on foot. "Not too fast, or you will make yourself sick." He had a quiet authority with animals, and they responded to him, settling down enough to drink at a more reasonable pace. Elena dismounted and led Cielo to a separate trough he had set up. "This is more than I expected," she said. "Your cattle were dying," Thomas replied. "Seemed like the right thing to do was make sure they got what they needed." They stood together in the sun, watching the herd drink, and Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, but one escaped and ran down her dusty cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You are welcome, Elena." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice did something strange to her insides. Over the next few days, a pattern developed. Elena would bring her cattle to Thomas's property each morning, and they would graze on what sparse grass remained and drink from his well. Thomas would work alongside her, helping to manage the herd and making sure none of the animals overdid it as they recovered from their near-death experience. They talked while they worked. Elena learned that Thomas had indeed been a deputy marshal in Colorado, but he had grown tired of the violence and the politics and decided to try his hand at ranching instead. He had chosen Texas because he wanted to go somewhere nobody knew his name or his reputation. "What was your reputation?" Elena asked one afternoon as they sat in the shade of his barn, eating a simple lunch of bread and cheese. "Fast with a gun," Thomas said quietly. "Too fast. Men would come from all over to try me to see if they could be the one to beat me. I got tired of killing people who had nothing against me except pride." Elena studied his face, seeing the weight of old memories in his eyes. "How many men did you kill?" 12, he said. "All legal, all in self-defense or in the line of duty. But legal does not mean easy to live with." "Is that why you stay alone?" she asked. "Because you are afraid of your past catching up?" "Partly," Thomas admitted, "and partly because I never found someone worth risking it for." He looked at her as he said it, and Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. She changed the subject, talking instead about her father and how he had built the ranch from nothing, how he had come from Mexico as a young man and worked as a cowhand until he had saved enough to buy his own land, how he had married her mother, a teacher from San Antonio, and how they had built a life together against all odds. "He sounds like a good man," Thomas said. "He was the best man I ever knew," Elena replied. "And he taught me that land is more than just dirt and grass. It is legacy and future and everything we are." "Is that why you are fighting so hard to keep it?" Thomas asked. "I am fighting because I do not know how to quit," Elena said fiercely. "This ranch is all I have left of my family. My mother died when I was 10, and my father is gone now too. If I lose the land, I lose them all over again." Thomas reached out and put his hand over hers, his calloused palm warm and rough and somehow perfect. You will not lose it. We will make sure of that." The touch sent electricity up her arm, and Elena found herself looking into his blue eyes and seeing things there that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. As the days turned into a week, Elena's cattle began to recover. They filled out slightly, their eyes grew brighter, and they stopped making those pitiful sounds of suffering. Elena herself began to look better too, sleeping more soundly, knowing her animals were safe, eating better because Thomas insisted she share his meals. They grew closer in the way people do when they work side by side toward a common goal. Elena learned that Thomas loved to read and had a small collection of books in his house that he treasured. Thomas learned that Elena had a beautiful singing voice and could gentle even the most fractious animal with her songs. They learned each other's rhythms and movements, developing the kind of wordless communication that usually took years to build. One evening, as they sat on Thomas's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red, Elena finally asked the question that had been bothering her. "Why are you really doing this, Thomas? And please do not tell me it is just because of a debt to my father." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "Do you believe in fate, Elena?" "I believe in hard work and determination," she replied. "I used to think that way too," Thomas said. "But then I came to this town, and I met your father, and something about this place felt right, like I was supposed to be here." He turned to look at her. "And then I saw you in town one day, arguing with the sheriff about water rations, and you were so fierce and so beautiful and so completely unwilling to back down. And I thought to myself that maybe fate was real after all." Elena's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Thomas, I am doing this because I want to help you," he said simply. "And because maybe if I help you, you might see me as something more than just the neighbor with the working well." "What would you want me to see you as?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer. "As a man who is falling in love with you," Thomas said. "As a man who wants to stand beside you and help you save your ranch, and maybe build something together that is bigger than both of us alone." Elena could not breathe. Nobody had ever spoken to her like this with such raw honesty and vulnerability. The young men in town had tried to court her after her father died, but they had wanted her land, not her heart. They had seen her as a problem to be solved or a prize to be won. Thomas was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "I am scared," Elena whispered. "I have spent so long being strong and handling everything alone that I do not know how to let someone in." "You do not have to know right now," Thomas said gently. "You just have to be willing to try." Elena reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she said. "I think I have been since that first day when you offered to share your well. Nobody has ever just helped me like that, without wanting something in return." "I do want something in return," Thomas said with a small smile. "I want your heart, but I want you to give it freely, not because you feel you owe me." "My heart is not something anyone can take," Elena said, "but I think I might be willing to give it to you if you promise to take care of it." "I promise," Thomas said, and then he was leaning in and his lips were on hers, soft and warm and tasting of coffee and promise. Elena melted into the kiss, feeling something inside her that had been locked tight for so long finally begin to open. She had been so focused on survival that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly alive, to feel desire and hope and the electric thrill of connection with another person. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "Stay for dinner. Stay the night. Not in my bed," he added quickly. "I have a spare room. I just want more time with you." "Okay," Elena said, surprising herself with how easy the answer came. They ate together at his table, a simple meal of stew and cornbread that Thomas had made himself. They talked late into the night, sitting close on his worn sofa, and Elena told him things she had never told anyone else. About how scared she had been when her father died, about how the other ranchers had tried to buy her out for pennies on the dollar, about how she had learned to shoot and ride and manage accounts because she refused to let anyone think she was less capable than a man. Thomas listened to all of it, really listened. And when she was done, he told her about the nightmares he still had sometimes, about the faces of the men he had killed, about how he had come to Texas hoping to outrun his past, but knowing it would always be part of him. The past does not have to define us, Elena said. We get to choose who we become. I am choosing to become someone worthy of you, Thomas said. You already are, Elena replied. She did sleep in his spare room that night, but she left the door open, comforted by the sound of him moving around in the house, by the knowledge that she was not alone. When she woke in the morning, she found Thomas had already been up for hours. He had fed and watered her cattle, and he had made breakfast. And when she came into the kitchen, he looked at her with such warmth that she felt it all the way to her toes. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she replied, and it felt like the start of something new. But the drought was not over, and the world beyond Thomas's property was still desperate and dangerous. 2 days later, Elena was in town buying supplies when she overheard a group of ranchers talking at the saloon. Wade has water, and he is sharing it with that Mexican girl, one of them was saying, his voice ugly with resentment. Meanwhile, our herds are dying. Someone should do something about that, another said. Make him share with everyone, not just his little sweetheart. Elena's blood ran cold. She knew these men, knew they were the kind who took what they wanted and asked questions later. She finished her business quickly and rode hard back to Thomas's ranch, her heart pounding with fear. She found him working in the barn, and she quickly told him what she had heard. Thomas's face went hard, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. They will come, he said, tonight probably, thinking the darkness will give them courage. What do we do? Elena asked. We prepare, Thomas said grimly, and we hope they are willing to listen to reason before things get ugly. They spent the afternoon getting ready. Thomas checked his weapons and made sure they were loaded. Elena insisted on staying, refusing to leave him alone to face whatever was coming. As the sun began to set, they positioned themselves on the porch, rifles across their laps, and waited. The riders came just after full dark. 6 of them, their faces shadowed by hat brims and bandanas. They stopped at the edge of Thomas's property, just outside the circle of lamplight from the house. Wade, the leader called out. Elena recognized the voice as belonging to Jack Brennan, a rancher from the west side of town who had tried multiple times to buy her land. We want to talk. So talk, Thomas said, his voice calm but carrying clearly in the still air. You have water, and you are hoarding it, Brennan said. That is not right. Everyone should get a share. My well, my property, my water, Thomas replied. That is how ownership works, Brennan. Not during a drought, another man called out. During a drought, water belongs to everyone. According to what law? Thomas asked. According to the law of survival, Brennan said, and there was a threat in his voice now. You share that water, or we take it. Elena stood up, her rifle held ready, but not pointed at anyone yet. You will do no such thing. Mr. Wade has been generous enough to help my cattle when the rest of you offered nothing but insults and low-ball offers for my land. If he chooses to share his water with me, that is his right. Elena Martinez, Brennan said, his voice mocking. I should have known you would be here. You have been trying to play rancher since your daddy died, but everyone knows a woman cannot handle a spread alone. Why don't you just sell out and let the men handle things? Rage surged through Elena, hot and fierce. I have handled things just fine without your help or your condescension, Brennan. My cattle are alive because Thomas Wade is a good man, which is more than I can say for you. Enough talking, one of the other riders said, reaching for his gun. Thomas moved faster than Elena would have thought possible. His rifle came up and fired, and the man's hat flew off his head. The next one goes lower, Thomas said, his voice like ice. Now you all need to think carefully about what you do next. I was a deputy marshal for 5 years. I know how to handle trouble, and I'm not afraid to do it again if I have to. The riders shifted nervously, clearly not having expected this level of resistance. My well can support my cattle, and Elena's herd, Thomas continued. It cannot support the whole county. If I let all of you take water, it will run dry inside a week, and then nobody has anything. I am sorry your animals are suffering, but threatening me is not going to change the math." "So what do you suggest?" Brennan asked, his voice tight with frustration. "I suggest you do what smart ranchers have been doing for centuries during drought," Thomas said. "Drive your herds north to where there is water. Sell them if you have to, at a loss, and rebuild when the rains come. Or stay here and watch them die slowly. But you do not get to threaten me on my own land and expect me to reward that behavior." There was a long, tense silence. Then Brennan spat in the dirt and wheeled his horse around. "This is not over, Wade." "Yeah, it is," Thomas said quietly. "Because if you come back here looking for trouble, I will give you more than you can handle." The riders left, disappearing into the darkness, and Elena let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Her hands were shaking, and Thomas gently took the rifle from her and set it aside. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am furious," Elena said. "How dare they? How dare Brennan say those things about me?" "Because he is a small man with a small mind," Thomas said, "and small men always try to tear down what they cannot understand or control." He pulled her into his arms, and Elena buried her face in his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "You were magnificent, by the way, fierce and brave and absolutely magnificent." "I was terrified," Elena admitted. "Bravery is not the absence of fear, Thomas said. "It is acting despite it, and you did that." They went inside and locked the doors, and Thomas insisted Elena sleep in his room while he kept watch from the living room. She wanted to argue, but she was exhausted from the adrenaline crash, and she fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit his pillow, surrounded by the scent of him. When she woke, gray dawn light was filtering through the curtains, and Thomas was sitting in a chair by the window, his rifle across his knees. He looked tired but alert. "Did they come back?" Elena asked. "No," Thomas said. "I think we convinced them it was not worth it." Elena got up and went to him, taking his face in her hands. "You need to sleep." "I need to make sure you are safe," Thomas replied. "I am safe," Elena said. "I am safe because I am with you." She kissed him, slow and deep, pouring all her gratitude and affection and growing love into it. Thomas responded with a hunger that took her breath away, his arms coming around her and pulling her close. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Thomas said, "Marry me." Elena blinked, sure she had heard wrong. "What?" "Marry me," Thomas repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but Elena, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you sing to your cattle. I love how you refuse to give up even when everything is against you. I want to spend every day of the rest of my life helping you save that ranch and building a future together." "Thomas," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know. I needed you to know that this is not some passing thing for me. You are everything." "Yes," Elena said. "Yes?" Thomas repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. "Yes, I will marry you," Elena said, laughing through her tears, "because I love you too and because you are right. When you know, and I know that you are the man I want beside me for the rest of my life." Thomas let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He set her down and kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back, just pure love and joy and promise. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who came through town. It was a simple ceremony held at Thomas's ranch with only a handful of guests. The town doctor came, and the mercantile owner who had always been kind to Elena, and a few of Thomas's fellow ranchers who respected him. Elena wore her mother's wedding dress, which she had carefully preserved in a trunk. It was simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, and it fit her perfectly. Thomas wore his best shirt and pants and a new string tie, And when he saw her walking toward him across the dusty yard, Elena saw tears in his eyes. "You are so beautiful," he whispered when she reached him. "You're not so bad yourself," Elena replied, making him laugh. The preacher spoke about love and commitment and the importance of standing together through hard times. And when he pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Elena like she was his whole world. They spent their wedding night in Thomas's house, which was now Elena's house too, and they consummated their marriage with tenderness and passion and a sense of rightness that felt like coming home. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, and Thomas traced lazy patterns on Elena's bare shoulder. "I want to combine our ranches, Horridis Tragines," he said. "Make one big spread. We can use my well to support both herds. And when the drought finally breaks, we will be in a stronger position than either of us would have been alone." "I like that idea," Elena said. "And I want to raise horses too, not just cattle. My father always said this land was perfect for horses." "Then we will raise horses," Thomas said simply. "We will build whatever life you want, Elena, together." The drought continued for another 6 weeks, but Elena and Thomas weathered it as a team. They moved her cattle permanently to Thomas's property and sold off the older, weaker animals to reduce the strain on the well. They carefully managed every drop of water, and they made it work through sheer determination and ingenuity. When the rains finally came in late September, it was like the whole world let out a breath it had been holding. The first drops fell on a Tuesday afternoon, fat and heavy and smelling of hope. Elena ran out into the yard and stood with her face turned up to the sky, letting the water soak her hair and dress, and Thomas came out and joined her. They danced together in the rain, laughing like children, and Elena felt a happiness so complete it almost hurt. They had made it. They had survived the worst the land could throw at them, and they had done it together. In the months that followed, the land began to recover. Grass grew green and thick, the creek on Elena's old property started flowing again, and the cattle grew fat and healthy. Thomas and Elena worked from sunup to sundown, building their combined ranch into something truly special. Elena discovered she was pregnant in early December, and the joy on Thomas's face when she told him was something she would remember for the rest of her life. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach and said, "We made this. We made a whole new life." "We did," Elena agreed, her own happiness overflowing. Their son was born in August of 1879, a healthy baby boy with Thomas's blue eyes and Elena's dark hair. They named him Daniel, after Elena's father, and when Thomas held him for the first time, Elena saw the man she loved transform into a father before her eyes. "Hello, little man," Thomas whispered. "I am your papa, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you to be a good man like your grandfather." Elena watched them together and felt her heart might burst from the fullness of her love. As Daniel grew, the ranch prospered. Thomas and Elena added a horse breeding operation, and Elena's instincts proved correct. The land was perfect for raising quality horses, and they quickly developed a reputation for producing smart, sturdy animals that could handle the demands of ranch work. They had 2 more children, a daughter named Rosa in 1881 and another son named Samuel in 1884. Their house rang with laughter and chaos and love, and Elena often thought about how close she had come to losing everything during that terrible drought. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Thomas one night as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset while their children played in the yard. "Giving up your quiet life to take on a wife and a ready-made herd of dying cattle?" Thomas looked at her like she was crazy. "Not for one single second. That drought was the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought you into my life. Everything good I have, everything I am, started the day I decided to share my well with a desperate woman and her dying cattle." "I was not desperate," Elena protested. "I was determined." "You were desperate and determined," Thomas said with a grin, "and I fell in love with both sides of you." Elena laughed and leaned into him, and they sat together watching their children and their land and their life, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Daniel grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the horses as much as his mother did. Rosa was fierce and independent, with a sharp mind for numbers that made her invaluable when it came to managing the ranch accounts. Samuel was the dreamer, always off exploring or reading or coming up with wild schemes that usually ended in laughter. Elena and Thomas grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of years of ranch work, but their love only deepened with time. They still danced in the rain when storms came through. They still sat on the porch in the evenings holding hands and talking about everything and nothing. They still kissed like newlyweds, even after decades of marriage. When Elena was 45, she found herself pregnant one last time, a surprise that shocked them both. Their youngest daughter, Maria, was born in 1902, and she was spoiled rotten by her older siblings and her parents alike. Elena often thought about that summer of 1878, about how desperate and alone she had felt, about how close she had come to giving up. And then she would look at Thomas, still handsome despite the gray in his hair and the lines on his face, and she would think about the courage it had taken for him to ride up to her property and offer help when he did not have to. "You saved my life," she told him one night as they lay in bed, their bodies fitting together with the ease of long practice. "You saved mine," Thomas replied. "I was half dead inside before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You woke me up, Elena. You made me feel again." "We saved each other," Elena said, and Thomas agreed. As they entered their 60s, they began to slow down, leaving more of the daily ranch work to their grown children. Daniel had married a school teacher from town and had 3 children of his own. Rosa had shocked everyone by becoming a lawyer, one of the first women in Texas to do so. Samuel had gone east to study at university and came back with a degree in veterinary medicine, which he used to care for animals all across the county. Maria was still young, full of fire and opinions, determined to make her own mark on the world. Elena and Thomas became grandparents and then great-grandparents, and their ranch became a gathering place for family, a sprawling operation that had grown from those desperate beginnings into something lasting and important. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge party. The whole county came out to celebrate, and Elena stood beside Thomas, his arm around her waist, and looked at the crowd of people who had come to honor them. 50 years, Thomas said wonderingly. "It feels like yesterday and forever all at the same time." "It has been the best 50 years of my life," Elena said. "Every single day with you has been a gift." "Even the hard days?" Thomas asked. "Especially the hard days," Elena replied, "because we faced them together, and that made all the difference." They danced that night under the stars, moving slowly to music played by a fiddle and guitar, and Elena rested her head on Thomas's chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, the same heart that had been brave enough to offer help to a desperate woman with dying cattle all those years ago. When Thomas passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Elena mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had lived a full life together, rich in love and family and purpose. She knew she would see him again someday, and until then, she had their children and grandchildren and the ranch they had built together to comfort her. Elena lived another 10 years after Thomas died, and she spent that time passing on stories to the youngest generation, making sure they understood where they came from and what their family had overcome. She told them about the drought of 1878, about how their grandfather had been brave enough to share his well when everyone else had turned their backs, about how love and compassion and partnership could transform desperation into abundance. When Elena finally passed away at 94, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, her last words were, "Tell Thomas I am coming home." And those who were there said she died with a smile on her face, as if she could already see him waiting for her on the other side. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, a living testament to what two people could build when they chose to face the world together. And in the family cemetery on the hill overlooking the land, two headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still clearly readable. Thomas Wade, the inscription on one said, beloved husband, father, and grandfather, a man who shared his well in his life. Elena Martinez Wade, the other said, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, a woman who never gave up. And between them, carved into both stones, were the same words, together we survived, together we thrived, together forever. The land remembered them, the land they had fought for and loved and nurtured. The grass grew green over their graves, watered by the same well that had saved Elena's cattle all those years ago, the well that had brought them together and given them a chance at love. And on summer evenings, when the light slanted gold across the pastures and the cattle grazed peacefully and the horses ran free, some folks swore they could see two figures standing on the porch of the old house, holding hands and watching the sun set together, still in love after all these years, still together, still home.